So first we're just going to introduce ourselves. So my name's Cortlyn Brown. I'm a PGY2 at UCSF. And we just want to talk a little bit about why this workshop and why this topic is really important to us. So specifically diversity and inclusion, cultural humility, and implicit bias. So it's really important to me for many reasons. I think one of them is just because I literally see it every single day, from just having my patients tell me that they need to talk to my husband and they don't think that women can be providers, which is really unfortunate for them because I don't have a husband, so nobody's going to come talk with them. Or just the patient that gets signed out as 36-year-old female with total body dolor, just getting worse care and not being seen after sign out, maybe taking 2 hours to see that patient rather than the patients who aren't signed out with that kind of target and stigma on them. So I think it's just something we experience every single day and really important to focus on.
Hello, that's me. I'm Rosny. Nice to meet you all. First name is Rosny, last name is Daniel. I'm very sure of that. People always ask me. This is work that's important to me because I want people who are growing up to feel included and able to be a part of the conversation and become physicians. So I think just trying to make sure that everybody recognizes that there's opportunity and ability to be a doctor is important to me. And I think that the more people you see who look like you or people you can relate to or people who are willing to talk to you who are in a profession makes it a lot easier to actually imagine yourself doing that. So that's why it's important to me. And I'm one of the chief residents at UCSF. I get to work with these two.
And then after we introduce ourselves, we're actually going to have everybody form kind of a semicircle circle up in the front, so we'll help just so that we can facilitate more conversation.
Oh, I now have a mic. All right. My name's Star Knight. I'm one of the faculty at UCSF. This is a weird sound. Is it just me, or is it like I'm in a bubble? That's great. Okay. I am one of the ultrasound faculty at UCSF, and I work clinically at San Francisco General Hospital, which is our trauma center and our county hospital. The work is important to me personally, given my life experiences navigating the waters of being an undergrad med student, a resident, and a faculty member in the medical field, and realizing how I've been treated throughout that time, how patients are treated, thinking about my family and friends and how they will be treated and approached by medical staff. But also, I work very closely with high school students. I bring them into the emergency department regularly, and I want us to reflect the values and the mission that we set out to do. And I really want us to put action behind all the work that we set out to do. I want us to really embody the principles that we say we're there to do. So that's why it's important to me. And that's just a little brief intro about myself. Go through these learning objectives.
So let's have everybody form that semicircle that I was mentioning.
I like it. This way we can kind of get to know each other a little better. Is this yours?
Yeah. Okay. Over here. They're back here. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right, excellent job with the first task.
Hello.
This one's on. All right, cool. Should be recording. Okay, so the learning objectives, they're pretty clear. We want to just talk about self-awareness and help people understand identity, privilege, their own biases. There's some of the key concepts we'll be talking about: implicit bias, microaggressions, allyship. And if you don't understand all of these terms, or maybe we all have a different understanding of what exactly they are, that's totally fine. We're going to go over everything in more depth. We have like 4 hours, so of course we'll have time to talk about it. And we'll talk, importantly, also about response strategies. I think a lot of people come to things like diversity and equity and this and that and feel like they have a day where they learn a lot, but then feel down because they don't have a lot to bring back to change things, or feel like they've learned about something that seems sad to them. So one thing that's really important for us is talking about response strategies and some things that we can really bring home and back to our institutions to help our patients, to help ourselves, and to help our colleagues and staff as well. So that's a very important objective for us also. And trainees and learners, of course, too. All right, and we want to talk about ground rules. This is an opportunity for us to kind of make the ground rules. We have a couple that we'll click through, but just want to see if the crowd or everybody here wants to put anything out there or have some suggestions as to what the rules for the day should be. They can be as small or big as you like them to be.
Just some rules of engagement that you want to abide by. Respect. I like that. All right. I'm gonna write this down. I'm gonna write your responses down. Let me just grab one.
What are some other ideas? So just think about how you want to be treated and how you want to treat anybody else.
Kind of along those lines, but not invalidating, I guess, like exact ones.
That's a really good one. So not invalidating others and their experiences and what they're saying. What are some other ones? Those are two really good ones. I think those are probably two of the more important ones that we can have.
Something I've heard in similar workshops to this is trust, intent, name, impact, which is nice and pithy, but the general idea of trusting that everyone in the room has good intent in what they're saying, but if they say something that offends, doesn't come out the right way, gets to you to vocalize that, and it's not about targeting people and responding to people, but responding to ideas and concepts that are brought up.
Great, I really like that. So you said trust, intent,
Name, impact.
name, impact.
So we're
Great.
saying assuming positive intention and naming impact.
Yeah.
I would say going further is to ask and not assume.
I like that.
If something does
Great,
bother you, don't assume
right,
the person's intentions one way or the other, but ask a question.
perfect. Yeah, so ask and don't assume. That's great.
One that we don't have written down up here, but I always think of as step up and step back. So step up when the space is there and step back when you're taking too much of the space.
Any other big ones?
Well, I think that's a good start. We'll add ours in. Stay engaged. Be kind, not nice. Do you want to explain that one, Star?
Being kind, but so it's similar along the lines of what was mentioned earlier in regards to being kind to one another while we are delayering and coming out of our little compartments. We're very good at compartmentalization in the medical field, especially in emergency medicine, but not shying away from engaging in conversations to help us all stretch. So not doing what you think is the nice thing when there's something deeper to discuss.
Speaking your truth and nobody else's, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but speaking from one's own personal experiences and not trying to speak for others is important. And expecting and accepting a lack of closure. We talked about going home with some tools and some ideas that may be useful, but I don't think we're going to solve all the issues of the world today. If we could, that'd be excellent. So I'm looking forward to that happening, but I expect that to not happen. And then Star wants to talk a little bit about the stretch down.
That's right. All right, we can put these up. So today we're going to encourage you to stretch yourself. As I mentioned, we're really good. I am really good at compartmentalizing. It's necessary to be an effective physician, to be an effective emergency medical provider. But today we want you to delayer and open up. That means, like, most of us live in the comfort zone, which is a nice, comfy, warm place for us to live, familiar place. But you can't really learn very much in the comfort zone. We're encouraging you guys to expand yourself, be a little bit vulnerable, and step out into the stretch zone. That's where we'll be able to have the most impact. We'll be open to learning, but we don't want to push you guys too far out into the panic zone. So if you start to feel like you are getting too charged, feel free to take a walk out, take a step, take a couple breaths, come back to the group, or try to address it with the group. But we definitely want to avoid you heading into the panic zone. We want you to open up out of the comfort zone. Both of those areas, there's really no room for growth. You're not really open to growth in either one of those. So that's all. Just trying to delayer. We're going to get there. I know we don't know each other yet, but we're going to know each other very well very soon.
Okay, so why is this important? Why is this topic? We told you why it's important to the three of us, so we're just great people. So we didn't want to just give you the California or UCSF perspective. So what we did a very informal survey. We wanted to get the emergency medicine resident, as well as medical students that are interested in emergency medicine, attending, and fellow perspective. So we sent about 10 questions out. We sent it nationwide to all emergency medicine residencies, and then we compiled the data. And this is just some of the data. We got about 60 responses, and it's a pretty good representation of medical students to residents to fellows and attendings. So each of these are different questions that we asked. You'll see that the darker the blue, the more frequent they experience that. So the really dark blue is almost daily, and then the light blue at the bottom is never. It's also going from the more frequent they experience at the top to the less frequent at the bottom. So the first says, people are surprised with how well I speak English. And you can see that here, 30 people say that people are never surprised with how well they speak English. The next question. People ask me to interpret for patients' families whom I'm not involved in treating. And this for some reason happens to me, even though I don't think I look like any particular background, so I know that it happens to a lot of people. Next question. So this one really is pretty sad to me. It's one of the more sad ones. So a patient blatantly calls me a term referring to my race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender. You can see that if you add up the top three, so almost daily, at least once a week, and at least once a month, it's at least like 15 people just right there. So 15 people are experiencing this at least once a month. And that's just like, it just really gets to me. And then a staff member blatantly calls me a vulgar term referring to my race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender. This is a little bit less frequent, but there's still people who experience that almost daily. And that's from staff. This is from people that we're supposed to feel like we're a community with and that we're supposed to trust. And then the next one. This one happens more frequently than any, yeah, you're nodding your head. Yep. Exactly. So, people mistake me for someone who shares an aspect of my identity. There are a few Hispanic males in my program, and everybody interchanges their names all the time. And it happens with Star and some of the other Black teams, literally all the time. And so you see about 10 to 12 people say that this happens almost daily. And then if you add up the almost daily at least once a week and at least once a month, it's like, I can't do math, that's why I went into medicine, but that's like 30 people maybe, 20 to 30, and that's just really astonishing to me. And then this is one that really hit home for me. So we go into a field where we're going into it to help others, to really give a piece of ourselves to others, to the community, and yet there's so many people that say that they felt the need to conceal an aspect of their identity in order to be treated fairly. You can see that there's 3 people that have to conceal part of themselves almost daily to be treated fairly. Then if you add up at least once a week and at least once a month, 10 people that are experiencing that so frequently. And then lastly, so top, a patient refuses care from me. This happens to me a lot. Rosny was saying it happens to him. I'm sure it happens to everybody. But you can see that the most frequent one is at least once a month. That's really frequent. And then if you go down, as patient specifically asks for provider, whom is of the same gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. And that's also the most frequent is at least once a month. So those are all things that are happening really frequently. And this is across the country. And again, not just with our residents, but with our fellows, attendings, and our medical students.
Does any of this surprise you guys? Any of those results? No?
Yeah.
No? Yeah.
I had to laugh on the one about being, like you said, Hispanic, so you're the same.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of doing it, but for the flip for Caucasian, I have
Yeah.
residents, and I have 3 that if you put them in scrubs with their ponytails up from behind, I can't tell the difference of it.
Yeah.
And after 3 years, 2 of them are now on faculty, and still that's the ongoing joke.
Jeez.
Are you sure that's the faculty member you want?
No, it's true. We have a lot of tall blonde interns right now, tall blonde female interns, and at the beginning of the year, I would always get them mixed up, and I had to check myself every single time, and I kept on doing it, so we're all guilty of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think about what that means for that person, like many of those responses, being mistaken for someone that's not of your own, that has some similar identity to you, being, walking into work, feeling like you need to conceal yourself, having vulgar terms thrown your way by people that you're working alongside with or people that you're taking care of. That's just, yeah, that's pretty, I mean, it's something that maybe we're not surprised with, but when you think about the impact on that individual and how effective they could be, and how that can affect their ability to provide care and stay focused, it's pretty impactful. I mean, it's definitely sad. I wanted to just remind people we have graffiti walls up, so those are these two little easels. And once again, anytime during the session, please feel free to share anonymously experiences that you've had as a witness, as a target in regards to microaggressions, or just lessons you've learned, like perhaps what lesson you learned in trying to help distinguish similar looking residents or faculty members, just to make them feel valued in the team.
I already added one up that I just learned the other day. So we were posting on our residency group me Happy Mother's Day to all the new moms and to all the moms to be, and then somebody posted and to all the non-biological moms and to all the individuals who aren't moms that function in that role. And that was just like, I just took a step back. I'm like, man, I thought that I was really like forward and progressive, and I would have never thought of that. So it's something that, it's great to learn from your community. So that's one that I added up there in the lessons learned.
Awesome.
Do you want to mention that? I guess we already talked about that.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. All right. So just a couple definitions, so we're all on the same page about diversity, inclusion, and equity. So diversity, simple enough: unique characteristics, perspectives, life experiences that define us as individuals. Inclusion, trying to create an environment where all individuals are comfortable to contribute fully and feel valued, engaged, and supported to reach their full potential. And then equity is fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement of all individuals. We have a couple kind of quick examples. Has anyone seen this cartoon before? I really like this one. It's illustrative of the point of what equity is. So equality, sure, everybody gets the same thing, but that may not be useful at all. Equity, maybe we distribute things in such a way that makes it actually fair for people based off of who they are or where they come from, to give people the same kind of level playing field. And then Star, you were talking about something where there's another cartoon of this, but then the fence is gone. That's like the meta level.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate.
We've reached like ultimate diversity and inclusion. We're all just, meditating in a yoga pose or something like that, and there's not even a wall between us. And this is one that I really like as well. So Cortlyn and I were talking about this one, and we don't mean to be political at all, so don't worry. So this is the idea of saying all lives matter. So this person comes in and says, my arm's broken. Doctor says, like we usually do when we see our patients. And then the doctor says, okay, all bones matter. And this guy's like, yeah, but right now let's take care of this broken one. And I think the concept of that, this is something that came up for me a lot in a lot of conversations with my friends around the Black Lives Matter movement, is that I think there was this assumption that, it was saying, no, only this matters. It was never an only this matters thing. It was trying to say that this matters too. And trying to define something in this instance, which was black lives or black bodies, which from a lot of people's perspectives and personal experiences are not treated fairly or equitably. So how do we call that out in the moment to make something on a fair playing field and say, all right, well, if this thing is being treated wrong or different right now, how can we approach this in an equitable way to make it so that everyone's kind of on the same playing field? And of course, this example is not just specifically about ethnicity, and we'll get into that too. It's not just about that. There's a lot of different instances where this really matters, where we're trying to say, okay, let's see if there's a problem or where there's inequity. How can we actually focus on that and try to fix it? The other thing I want to mention is, we're not here to do this because we're all going to be outside soon holding up a globe. And I just did a search on the Free Image website for diversity, and it's like, yeah, we got black people, we got white people, we got women, we got men. Maybe someone's gay up there, I don't know. But we're all like holding the globe up together and talking and saying that the world is great. That's not really the point of having these conversations or being at these things. And I think most of you in the room understand that. It's probably kicking a dead horse to say it. But it's more so when we're in this situation. When we're in the hospital, when we're in a busy resuscitation bay, when there's an MCI, and everybody's here. This is the actual world that most of us live in, right? We don't have the option to say, we only want to talk to this type of person, only want to see that type of person. So how do we make all of our colleagues, all of our trainees, all of our students, all of our patients, all of our staff members, how do we make everyone feel as if they're valued and important parts of the team, and we're actually caring about them, no matter who they are or where they come from, and making sure we have an open and level playing field for people to feel heard. And we mentioned this, there's many different categories of diversity. I think the easiest ones people think of is men, women, heterosexual, homosexual, queer, wealthy, Christian, able-bodied, all this stuff. These are kind of the big ones that I think most people would commonly think of. But it goes a lot further than that. It's not just that stuff we want to talk about or focus on. Are you a patient? Are you a provider? Are you a doctor or nurse? Those bring in a lot of power differences too. When you're a provider in a situation and there's a patient, you have an inherent level of power or privilege that's very different than the patient is, right? Are you an ER doctor? Are you a radiologist? Are you a psychiatrist? Are you an off-service rotator who's going to be treated differently because you're, the third-year med student or the fourth-year med student or whatever it may be? Or going even further than that, are you a quiet person and you're judged differently for that? Are you loud? Are you diabetic and people treat you differently for that? Are you a drug addict? Are you a person who's a sole provider versus someone who works in somewhere where there's a bunch of people? Are you an athlete? Are you not? Are you big? Are you small? Whatever. There's a lot of different categories, and the list could go on and on and on and on. We won't make you sit through that. The point is that it's a long list.
Oh, so we are going to go to our first activity. And this is an activity where we'll model this activity for you, but we want you to, once again, this is like peeling off the layers, starting to open up, and explain to us a time where you experienced the other, where you realized that you were the other or someone else was othered, where you realized that maybe life wasn't as fair as you thought it was. And I'll start off with a personal experience. So I'm from Los Angeles. I mentioned that to a couple of you guys. And I went to middle school with my mother is a teacher. She's a retired English teacher. I went to the same middle school as my mom, and I survived that. She really, she was never my teacher, but she did a lot of things for the Los Angeles Unified School District. In addition to teaching, she did some administrative work as well. And I'm a pretty forgetful person, and I still am sometimes. So we were leaving school. I got home and I realized I forgot my backpack. And the next day when we got back to school, my history teacher had my backpack, and pulled my mom aside and said, I have Star's backpack, and oh, let me tell you what I found in it. So not only did he have it, he opened up my backpack, he goes to pull out a calculator that says LAUSD on the back and like a protractor, things that I don't even think kids use nowadays, but they all have like an LAUSD imprint. And this was something given to me by my mom, who had a previous job, higher up in the Los Angeles Unified School District. So my mom's very vocal, and I realized how bad that was, but I really, at that moment, as a, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, I was really afraid for my history teacher. It's like, my mom is about to give it to you, and it is not going to be nice. But kind of reflecting back on that, it's something I hadn't thought about in a while until I had to do this exercise not too long ago. It didn't matter that I was a great student, a no problem student, that I was a student of my history teacher's colleague, whom he sees and has to go to, faculty meetings and kind of interact with. None of that mattered. All that mattered was he saw me as someone that probably he needed to, for some reason, go in my backpack and then assume the worst when he found a calculator or a protractor. There are many things I experienced kind of being, in my upbringing and being in honors classes. There weren't very many black students in honors classes, but I just, despite all those things that many people might have thought would have put me in perhaps a position of privilege or favored highly, none of that mattered. And that's one instance in my life where I realized, this is, life is not going to be how I imagine it might be, and that things, people do other you, regardless of how many ways you could be included. There's so many ways I could have been connected to him, It's unfortunate, but that's my story. You want to share?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I don't need a clicker.
Yeah, no, you don't. Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. Yeah.
I'll tell a quick story. My father is from Haiti. My mom is white. I'm half black, half white. I live in San Francisco where there's no sunshine, so
Yes, there is.
reflections right now. I was much darker before when I lived in Southern California and actually got some sun sometimes.
Just had a couple of days of sunshine this year.
Yeah, we did.
I saw it like one.
Yeah.
It was nice.
It was just part of
nice.
San Francisco. That was like a block by block area.
Yeah, it depends on where you're at. It's true.
It was blocked out. The
Yeah.
smoke from the
Yeah.
And I was trying to work it anyways. I remember, I just thought of this right now actually, but when I was a kid, I couldn't have been more than 6 years old. I would ride my bike all the time with my mom, and my mom's white, and she would say like, oh, let's go ride bikes. I grew up in Orange County in California, so mostly white, very, very white place to grow up in terms of population demographics. And I remember riding our bikes down this one street. We just ridden at the riverbed. We're on our way home. We're turning down the street, and this guy was going up the other street. And my skin was very dark at the time, and he just looked down, and I was a 6-year-old kid, and he just yelled the N-word at me. And was like, "Get out of here!" And then I didn't even know what that was. I was 6, so I was like, my mom's like, "Just keep riding. Let's keep going." So we rode home, and I didn't think about it that much, but I always remember, I asked, well, what does that mean? And my mom had to explain to me the concept of someone just yelling that at me as a 6-year-old kid, which is pretty nuts. And then I remember there was this rumor about a house that was kind of close to one of the places we grew up, that there was a lot of white supremacists there. And there was a pretty big skinhead population, almost movement in the 90s in Orange County. And I just had to avoid that area of town to get places. So I just say all right, cool, I'll go places, but I'm not gonna ever ride by there just for fear of being different. And that's a moment I definitely remember feeling like, wow, I am not like the others here.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will share 2 stories also. So just like Rosny, I'm half black, half white, and it's clearly just the San Francisco no sun that makes me look this way. It's clearly that, basically. So black Barbies. Basically, anytime my parents saw any sort of black, any little toy. So I had a Flojo Barbie doll, and this one little like black baby doll that I actually still have. They would like run across the street. I know she had multicolored nails.
Awesome. Flojo was awesome.
But they would basically like run across the street to get whatever toy it was that would represent who like part of me was and who a large part of me was. And so I was carrying my little black baby doll with my mom, who was white, and this person came up to us again. Like I said, I was about 6, and said like, that girl doesn't deserve a N-word baby doll. Get her a white baby doll like she deserves so she can know what she should be like. And I like, just like Rosny, I had no idea what any of that meant. So I had to ask my mom, and she also, when I was 6, had to explain that whole meaning to me. And I remember thinking like, well, what's wrong about being black? What's wrong about part of me? So then for a while, I just like told people I was white. And I don't think I even realized what the repercussions were of that or what I was really even saying. But in my mind, because that person said that, I associated black with being bad for a while and with not achieving. Because that's, you know, that's just what that person instilled in me for a few years. And then another time, so I ran for a national office of a really large organization whose focus was on underrepresented medical students. And I had a lot of experience with this group. I was past like board of directors, committee chair of the year, like a lot of experience. And so I ran for national office and I was elected. And I remember being really happy about that because this was my family in medical school. This was a community that I was a part of. They really understood who I was. They understood my black side, the struggle. And then after the election results were announced, I was walking outside and I heard like, many people be like, yeah, well, we just like elected her because she's the white girl and it's nice to bring some diversity. So even though they voted for me and it ended up being a really positive outcome, it's still, I don't think I've ever felt more dissimilar from a group that I had previously felt was my family. So they just saw me for just one thing that I am and didn't even open up or learn about my experiences and what I was able to give to the group. So that was really difficult for me.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So we're going to encourage you all to open up and share. Since we have this nice little intimate group, I think we can kind of do this in this setting. Do you feel like you could start?
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you want the spirit stick? Yeah, okay.
My residents will let you know. I'll talk loud enough for everybody.
Appreciate it.
So I'm Scotch, Irish, German, English. So I am as white as you can get, and very, very boring in terms of my whiteness. So unfortunately for me, I've not been on the receiving end of a whole lot of bias throughout my life, but I'm really interested in recognizing bias, especially when it's subconscious. And I don't think we, personally, and maybe I'm sheltered by this, I don't see or experience a whole lot or even observe a whole lot of overt conscious bias in my emergency department, except against people with mental illness. And even amongst staff and people who should know better, always assign out this guy in room 12, he's just crazy, he's just waiting for a psych evaluation. So I feel like that's, while we are paying attention to all of these subgroups or genres of people, and all of that is great, one of the groups of people that maybe we're not paying as much attention to as we should are people with mental illness, and hopefully that's improving now. But it seems to be excused and okay to label those people as just crazy when we really ought to be the ones who are protecting them and trying to treat them the same as any patient with a heart attack or a stroke or whatever else is coming through the door.
Entirely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
And we can popcorn unless you want to go around. You looked ready, so go for it. Go ahead.
No, actually, something that you had said about being a mom made me think of this. So I'm one of our few faculty that's not married without children in my group, and so I think I've been a little more vocal the last couple of years, but for the first 8 or 10 years I worked in our group, there was perhaps a little bit greater presumption that big major holidays, it wasn't a problem to work them, or to, the idea that I may want to leave and go visit my family other places because I didn't have family in the city I'm in. And so I think, probably not one of the traditional sort of lists of differences. On the other hand, in my group, very different. And I think it's taken, like I said, I've been a little more fussy the last couple of years. So I think that's somewhat equalized out, but just something I realize I'm not exactly like the others.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really strong example and a good example. And just like you were saying, it's not one of the typical groups that people think about, and that gets to the slide that Rosny was showing, where there's so many different types of diversity. So loud, quiet, having debt, not having debt, being the 10th child. There's just so many. Basically, everybody has some sort of diversity in them.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Whoever wants to go next. Okay.
Keep up the order. Anyway, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but so I kind of going along the lines of the childhood experiences. So my husband is Japanese, and so my children are mixed race. So the school district, they go to public school. The school district recently handed out a survey during the class that said, of course, being on the demographics, and so my 9-year-old living in my house and hearing me talk all the time looks at the survey and yells out in the class, "This is a racist survey." And because there was no option for multiple race. And to make the matter worse, this is actually a Japanese bilingual program, so the entire class is filled with mixed race children.
Wow.
Right? And there's no option for mixed race. And so my child really yelled that out, and so my husband and I got called in to talk with the teachers because he was disruptive.
Wow.
How did you handle that situation? I don't know. That's so difficult.
My husband was basically like, "That was a race." Like, what do you want from me?
Yeah. I mean, it's really impressive of your son. That's
Yeah.
kudos to him for recognizing, stepping up, and actually saying something, shining light on that. Yeah.
I don't know that they appreciate it. The teachers still didn't really appreciate it. But,
What did you say in Japanese?
Yeah, that's actually something that I always noticed growing up, that you couldn't select mixed race or multiracial. So I would always just write in my own at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually on the U.S. consensus, it wasn't until 2010, I think, when mixed race became a thing on it, which is just
Way late.
It's 8 years ago.
It's crazy. Come on in.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Come in.
Come join us.
Join our circle. How are you?
Well,
Good.
so
Good morning.
I'm from Hawaii originally. And so growing up in Hawaii, essentially, I'm the majority minority. There's no such thing as majority there. And I remember my first weekend of orientation for college and being strongly encouraged to go to the Asian Student Association meeting for the orientation. You should go to their mixer. This is in Boston. And this is really good. You should go do this. And I remember going there and feeling more out of place than any place I'd been, because most of their Asian kids, this was late 70s, were first generation. Most of them were from large urban cores, and mostly spoken. English was the second language, and I'm a total banana, self-described. So I'm yellow on the outside and white on the inside. But
I've never heard
more
that
just
before.
feeling, trying to fit in as the Asian. And I had never considered myself a minority. And then that afternoon, we were going down to a ball game with your dorm, and I'm on the train going into Boston, and a bunch of kids are on it, and they're jostling each other and laughing. And so I turned around and looked at them, and they made some snide, ching chong, some basically a crude statement like I must not be American or English or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I felt really out of place and really thought, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm not supposed to be here. I don't feel like I belong here at this place. But that was the first time I was really disrupted in my thinking, because I'd never considered myself anything unique or special. I mean, I grew up surrounded by mixed races and things.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's I think we've all had those moments where we're just reflect back on where you grew up and realize, the beauty sometimes of where you came from and how you have to now deal with society. Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah, you wanna.
A quick recap. First of all, we've solved all the problems, so
Yes.
we're good.
We got
That
more
part's done.
peace.
We're operating in peace right now.
We've essentially so far done an introduction to terms, talked a little bit about what the session's going to look like and some learning objectives, established some ground rules, which I'm sure you'll catch on to, and we are now just going over a quick history of difference. This is an exercise where we're basically talking about the first time that we recognize either ourselves or someone else as this concept of other. And one thing we focus on is that we have talked about race, but this is not just about race. We've talked about many different things, like having a family or not having a family, being married or not, many different things we've talked about.
Yeah. So we're just sharing stories right now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think going along with what you're saying, it's hard coming from somewhere where everybody knows you and knows what you are and who you are, and then going somewhere else and realizing that people have a completely different perception of you. So like my high school, everybody knew I was like the half black girl who looks white but is like really into like pro human rights. But then when I went to college, I had to completely reassert myself and tell everybody basically like, hi, I'm Cortlyn, I'm half black, half white. That really matters to who I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's tough just going somewhere else and seeing that people may have a completely different perception of who you are than how you view yourself.
And that people will make these assumptions about you with very little contact with you, right? Yeah.
So I actually had the opposite experience. So I grew up in Rhode Island, which is a predominantly white state. So I went to their like public school system, and it's mostly white students. I probably count like the Asian students like on one hand. But then I went to undergrad in the same state, Brown University, and that's like where like all different students from all over the country were able to go attend school. So I was like immersed in all this diversity, meeting all different like cultures and ethnicities. So I got to really like to grow up into that and assume that that was the case. But like when I go into other settings where I might be the only person of color, it actually I noticed it more since having gone through undergrad at Brown. And I actually do feel like physically uncomfortable being in those settings where I'm the only like non-white person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes when I'm in a situation like that, like if I'm, obviously I don't look half black, but if I'm around a group of men, I feel like I have to represent all of women and that people are looking at me to be that like female voice and to be the strong woman in the room, so.
So I'll kind of say my bit. So I'm also active duty in the Air Force. So this was back in 2012. So I identified as gay, and Don't Ask, Don't Tell was only repealed in 2011. So that was the first time when anyone who was lesbian, gay, or bisexual was able to openly serve in the military. And I had just gotten back from my deployment. I was working with a resident in one of our pods, and it was just he and I. And for some reason, we were slow that day, which does not normally happen. So we were talking about kind of experiences that we both had on deployments, because he had been in the Air Force prior to joining medical school. And I didn't even know how it came up, but he, at some point during his deployment, saw two men kind of holding hands and kissing, and he just kind of went off on this. He's like, I just can't stand looking at that. It's just so gross. I don't understand. And I'm like, in my head, I'm just, oh God, am I really going to have this conversation right now? Because, and then I was thinking, is he unreasonable enough that I might get assaulted, which happens all the time? But then my attending self kind of took over. I was like, no, I should really teach him that this is an okay thing to say. And I just looked him dead in the face, and I was like, Doug, I'm gay. And his face just dropped. And I was like, I know what you're talking about. I was like, I know this is how people talk in the military. It's still the old boys club. I was like, we're in a different world now. I was like, you can't say it. I was like, I'm not going to do anything against you right now. I was like, I know it was just a mistake. You didn't understand. You assumed I was on the same wavelength as you. I was like, but a lot of people in this hospital who either are gay but are not out, or just are not comfortable speaking up to someone who is a physician. I'm like, you'll get yourself himself in a lot of trouble, and rightfully so, if he keep talking like that. And he, but for his credit, he was really apologetic, and he's like, I just didn't know. He's like, and for the rest of the time in residency, he never had any issues like that. But it was just like, it was one of those things. I was like, man, I thought when it came out the first time that was it. I was like, no, it happens over and over and over again. And it's like, this kind of sucks. I don't want to have to do this all over again.
There's definitely an exhausting aspect of having to represent people from your, that you share identity with. It can be exhausting. But you stepped up to the plate. Good job. Seriously. Yeah.
Are people familiar with the concept of the minority tax? Some people heard of that. So the concept of the minority tax, I don't think we go right in the slides. Essentially, it's this idea that if you live in a non-power group or a position that's not typically in privilege, and you're in the minority, there's often this tax you have to pay of retelling your story about coming out, or having to explain to people what it means to be gay, or having to explain to people that it's not okay to say the N-word, or having to explain to people that you should let a woman speak and not speak over her, etc. This concept of this tax of always having to pay, you can't just go through the road with the simple path. There's all these extra little tolls and taxes along the way of extra things that we may have to do or say or experience or deal with just to get through the day.
In addition to that, as a faculty member, it extends into the fact that, so I'm a Black, lesbian, female faculty member, so I'm on a lot of committees, right? Because we have a diverse selection committee, and at some point you just have to say no, because as much as I am a team player and I like to help out my department, I cannot be on all of these committees, and it's a very common thing, and it's sort of like, okay, you're paying your minority tax to some extent, but you have to also stand up for yourself, and at some point just like, no, I can't be this person. And I don't just share that alone within my department or within my profession, but it's definitely something that a lot of people experience as you move up the rankings.
So, I have so many stories. But, so when I was also grade school, my mom, she never really did my hair like that. She used to do these cute little braids and call it a day, but they weren't that cute. And one day I was walking home from school, because my middle school was right across the street from where I lived. And so there was this clan of white boys that lived in my same neighborhood, and they would all bike to school and stuff. And so one day they were biking home, and they caught up to me, and so they stopped, and one of them was like, hey, can I touch your hair? And I was like, okay. I mean, I'm 12, so sure. So he reaches for a braid, and he's ugh, acting like it was some sort of snake or something, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I also kind of grew up in a very predominantly white town and everything. So the concept of hair was, I don't know, it seems so minor, but it was just I guess what was considered beautiful was long, flowy, catch it in the wind. And my hair just doesn't do that. So for the longest time, I would put chemicals to make it look that way, because I thought that that's what it took to be noticed by boys and whatnot. And so it really wasn't until I hit college that I decided that that just wasn't how I wanted to live my life, and so I cut my hair and started over. But yeah, it's just interesting how I feel there's so many things that are kind of defined by whether it's beauty standards or anything that's very European influence, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I am Black, I'm also African, so there are so many layers to how I identify. My parents are immigrants, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And to live in a society that's like defined by a lot of like European standards and stuff, even though you like, I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but
Yeah.
The standard assumption
yeah.
that everyone is white, Christian, straight, and that's the assumption of like what everything is based on.
That's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it isn't. Thank you for sharing. Come on in. Have a seat. We have some seats in the circle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I like your shirts.
Yeah. Want to give a synopsis? You did such a great job with the synopsis.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome. We have done a couple things so far. We kind of talked about some of the learning objectives today, which is defining several terms and talking about working on some self-awareness, as well as coming up with some response strategies when we have issues or when there's issues with faculty or residents, wherever it may be, how we can kind of approach some of these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. Did a couple definitions, and now we're talking about our story of difference and the first time people have experienced feeling as if they were the other. And this is, I think a lot of times people think of this as being race-based. We've tried to make it clear that it's not just about race or ethnicity, but we've also talked about sexual orientation, gender, and whether or not we've been someone who has a partner or is married or not, or has kids or not, kind of several different things in many categories that we've talked about. So, you've walked in for 12 seconds, and you just need to tell us your life story.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel free to sit back, relax for a moment. We are pretty close to finishing with this, and we have several more exercises throughout the day. So,
And it's
the
not.
password for Wi-Fi is Vituti Careers.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's not just a time where you felt like you were personally like the other, but maybe you witnessed other people being othered. We also talked about mental health and how the stigma behind, even in the healthcare field, behind patients who have mental disorders. So. Yeah,
So,
welcome.
I'll share something. It's sort of along the lines of the concept of the minority tax that you talked about. So one of the things I also do is I teach an undergraduate course, and we do it on patient-physician interactions. And so I spend a lot of time having my undergraduate pre-medical students shadow patients. And as part of that, I've really had them focus the last semester on language and interpretation. And we spend a lot of time thinking about interpretation and who interprets and whose role it is to interpret. So like a lot of you, we have a SAEM, which is like the professional interpretation service you can get a phone or an iPad or whatever for. And then we of course have lots of people in the hospital in Florida. So we have a lot of Spanish speakers. Well, also a lot of patients who don't speak Spanish, but we assume they speak Spanish, right? But we have, so we have a lot of languages, right? Disney World's an hour away, and we have a lot of language in Florida. So one of the things I started thinking about was this concept of who interprets, and one of the patients. So the students interview the patients, and they do a lot of qualitative interviewing. They kind of write down a lot of what they say. And one of the quotes from the patients was great, and it basically talked about he's a transplant patient, and so every time he comes into the hospital, he thinks about what that role is going to look like. And the patient pointed out that in the past the cleaning person has interpreted, his children have interpreted. He has been asked to interpret. He has been asked to interpret.
The patient.
Got to get out there, okay?
Yeah.
And so it's not about the fact that you're a sick person. You're already having potentially the worst day of your life to come see us, right? And now there's this like added barrier. How am I going to communicate, right? So what we really try to focus on, of course, I'm going to get into what we're doing with this, but really, no matter what the situation is, you're going to use the SAEM interpreting system, because that variable is just be out of the equation for people who are coming in with other things on their mind, right?
I think one of the things we talked about that during one of the sessions that I was leading for our incoming interns, and one of the points we made is that like in emergency medicine we're very rushed, and so using an interpreter you just have to accept that it's going to take longer. And if it's not taking longer, then you're doing something wrong.
And I was incredibly guilty of this, just for the record. I felt I was pretty good because I wouldn't use young family members, but I would often use colleagues. I saw that as one of the things. That's definitely me. It's guilty of grabbing my colleague to say, "Can you come interpret?" Other residents from fourth-year med students.
Yeah.
Right, that's a great source. But you look at that and you're just like, wow, I'm adding. I'm a researcher, and look at all this variability I'm adding to every patient visit. Right, what am I doing? Right.
Yeah, I was just reading, I forget where it was, maybe some application or something. It was one of the SLOs, so the sub-I letters, and it literally said, like, this person did a great job on this rotation. They served as our Spanish interpreter for the whole month.
That's, wow.
I have no idea if they're going to be a good doctor.
Yeah.
Right.
A good interpreter.
Yeah.
Just, again, like minority text, that's something that that person had to bear, and that's a whole other role that they were not trained in, did not go into med school to be an interpreter, and like that's just a role that they had to step up and fill, and they felt like they had to, and maybe they wanted to. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely some power dynamics in regards to who you ask as a physician, asking a student or a family member or maybe a trainee. I try to like reinforce that it's better to just take the time early with every patient interaction to understand why they're there, so that you guys are walking along that path together, as opposed to getting that quick history from family members. And many family members, just like if we were talking just in English with medical terminology, people aren't that familiar, and so then you end up walking down a path with the history you got, and then you end up with a better history, and then you're like, oh my God, now we have to go do, whole nother direction sometimes. But you're right. I mean, just taking that time, being relieved of that time, like as, with a trainee, like I know that, you're going to need we have so many languages in San Francisco, a Toisanese interpreter, and we just don't have one yet, or you've been on hold, but as soon as we get one, just take the time now, because later on never happens, Yeah.
What's your guys' perspective on this? So oftentimes I'm the third or fourth provider in the room after the nurse and the tech and the resident, and
Yeah.
sometimes the student and other nurses go into the room, and I'm in a situation where there's a family member already interpreting. So you generally say, look, we have an interpreter service. If you want us to use the interpreter service, I have no problem with that at all. We can get it right away. If you're more comfortable with your family member interpreting, I'm fine with that too. Like presenting that as an option for them. Do you think that's okay, or should we just say use the interpreter service all the time?
Not to get too researchy, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's actually the focus of my research.
Okay, yeah.
Oh my goodness, this is awesome. This is awesome.
Good room to
It's language justice, and so I feel like I'm a total fanatic about this all the time, because I do nothing but all day but study what are the implications when people don't use interpreters, and so I would say use a professional interpreter, but I mean on the other hand, what I see, because I spend so much time focusing on this, what I think sometimes my trainees learn from it is, oh, use the interpreter when Dr. Tyra's on shift.
Ha ha.
So, which is not the message that I want them to get, but I think that awareness has been raised, but I think it's really tough for residents, especially in my hospital. 54% of our patients are Spanish speaking, and so you can go through a whole shift and not have an English speaking patients on some days, and so I think that it's tough for residents, and I understand that to always kind of do the right thing and go and get the interpreter, but on the other hand, it's like when you see how the story changes completely.
Oh my goodness.
Someone can actually, interpret. I think it's worth it, because there's so many times where, something hinges on one or two words, and the actual story is completely different.
I totally agree, but you were going to make
Well,
comments.
if you really dig at what the patients think about this, what's amazing is they'll tell you over and over again that the doctors are busy. I wouldn't want to ask them to do that. And so if you present that as an option to them, that our Spanish population is so incredibly respectful of time and the fact that they're there having to have an interpreter. That's a very common theme, by the way. So they're never going to tell you to go get the interpreter. For the most part, they'll always say, oh, no, whatever you want to do. So I try to take that option away from them and just give it to them. And then the other piece of that, too, is the easier we make it and the more routine we make it, the quicker, right? Like anything else in emergency medicine, right? Just the quicker and easier and faster it becomes, and it becomes less of a burden for all of us. Right now, it's the same thing. I have to go get the thing, but it leads to things. Now we have Sericom on all of our iPhones and iPads that the hospitals bought us with the video guy and everything.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking fancy dancy over there. I'm impressed.
It
That's awesome.
Push, right? Like,
Yeah.
where's that Sericon thing again? Where is it again?
Yeah.
Where is it again? Right? Eventually, it's like, oh, just buy this.
Well, I
That's
think
awesome.
That demonstrates the concept of equity too, right? Because
Yes.
we should have that for everybody. So how
Right.
can we make it actually fair and not just, oh well, if you don't speak languages 1 through 3, then like sorry, you just don't get medical care.
Or why do we only have 2 landline phones that are capable of calling in the interpreter line?
Right.
One thing I'll add to with this concept of talking about people's languages and trying to approach different patients as individuals is cultural competency versus cultural humility. So cultural competency was developed as a term, I think in the late 70s, early 80s, this term of cultural competency came out, where how am I competent with patients that are not in what is typically considered to be the norm? So how am I culturally competent with black patients? How am I culturally competent with Spanish-speaking patients? How am I culturally competent with women, et cetera, et cetera? And that was this idea of understanding this perspective enough to provide the right level of care. But now people have moved more towards this concept of cultural humility, which is basically, well, I'm here to learn from you every single time and not to assume that I know this thing about whatever your background is. So how can I humble myself and have humility in this conversation? And a main idea behind it is to constantly be relearning and having self-awareness about your own deficits to make your experience better for the patient. So I think to have cultural humility, it does make sense probably to bring the interpreter to the room every time. And I have had a couple experiences where people have said, like, actually I'm a lot more comfortable if we don't have the interpreter, which I respect that because I'm not going to put my values and assumptions on them, but at least giving them that option and trying to have some humility about it.
I standardize it. So I walk in with a patient and I say, in that situation, right, the nurse, the medical student, the resident's already seen the patient. I go in and I say, I realize that you've been interpreting, but I'll say, like, I prefer to use an interpreter for some medically complicated words. If for any reason you feel, like that you and the interpreter isn't speaking, isn't communicating well with the patient, I say this to the family member, please feel free to let me know and we can discuss from there. Or if they're like very, as Rosny mentioned, if they're very adamant that they would prefer their family member, for sure. But I start off by saying this, I prefer to use interpreters for languages that I don't speak.
So I have gotten that impression, like when I present it as an option, they feel like it's a burden to have to do that for them. So they're just saying, I'm going to bring this in.
This is what I do for all my patients. If there's a communication breakdown, please let me know if you feel like the interpreter, and that happens, right? The interpreter is not getting what you're putting out there.
They don't actually speak the language.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's how you ask it. You're not like, I could get an interpreter on the phone for you.
It's way down the hall.
Yeah.
Jump through a couple
I'm tired.
Right.
to get there, but I'll get it.
Right, yeah.
But as you say, if there's multiple encounters or multiple interventions in this encounter, it may not be pragmatic to get an interpreter every single time. The nurse goes in and you go in the resident. So we'll often tell whoever goes in first, whoever's going to get the history, we have to use an interpreter. You may pop in to check on them to see what's going on, but then we always tell them at the very end, the last thing we're going to do is get the interpreter on the phone again, and we're going to go over everything we've done, all your labs, the plan of action, to make sure that you don't have any questions. So that even if you pop in between to check on them, they know from the start that we're going to get the formal interpreter on the phone at our sort of closing.
Yes, completely. That's actually a slide for my presentation tomorrow.
This is awesome. That's awesome.
What happens is that we value more when we are extracting the information from the patient, and so we're more likely to bring the interpreter in. But then when the patients need the information to be given back to them, then that's not something that we value as much, and so we're less likely to bring the interpreter back. And that's the key portion. They need to understand what happens.
No, especially on an emergent medical condition. Right?
Yeah.
That's where we really fail on them. So we're very into the history. We have the interpreter, and we bring we suck all that information, like on every word. We go back like, that's not an MI, it's not a P, I don't know what's going on with the telephone, go home. Everything's okay, it's bueno.
Yeah, right, yeah. What happened to you for the last 4.5 hours, right? Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, okay. And they're just like, I have no idea what happened there.
Yeah.
So one thing I've seen, no, go ahead.
what I find really interesting about this conversation is, I don't know about Jesse or Austin, but like I've specifically been taught you are not allowed to translate unless you are a certified translator. You are not allowed to let a family member translate. You are required to have a certified translator come in, and that's like been very intensely driven into our mentality when approaching a patient where English is not their first language.
That is the law.
Yeah.
Right.
The
But I think
reality
it's,
of busy emergency departments
Right.
and the law are
and what I find surprising were two things. Are, for me, I'm a fluent French speaker. I work in a French-speaking hospital, so I can speak medically in French. I am not allowed to, even in a busy emergency room. I mean, also you don't get a whole lot of French exclusively speaking patients, but when I was in undergrad, I would accompany my friends who were like TAs who are from France to go to doctors, because if you're not in an emergency room, it won't necessarily have a translator. And so when you're sick and vulnerable, that's what you need. But the second thing was how most of you were mentioning phones, and for sign language, that's not going to work. You have to have the visual interface. And while the technology has gotten better, and so more hospitals are adopting the technologies to do so, there is a huge deficit specifically for deaf and hard of hearing patients, where they, again, don't ask, or they have figured out how to navigate the world in such a way that they won't let it be a barrier. But at the same time, when you are sick, vulnerable, and also are having all of this medical lingo thrown at you, it is extremely difficult for someone to not have an interpreter if the only interpretation is offered by phone.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, at our institution, we have American Sign Language interpreters that will come in, but that's for people that speak American Sign Language. We have so many patients that are deaf or are hearing impaired that don't speak English. So don't speak ASL many times, and that can be difficult to navigate. You just have to work within the language and the method of communication that patient uses. And that might be many different things with their family members or their friends or their advocates. But it is, I mean, it's definitely a huge thing.
There's multiple variants of sign language.
That's correct, yeah.
There are actually different types of interpreters.
Yeah. It gets complex. Yes. I want to make sure we have time for our the newer members of the group to share if you've thought of anything that's popped in your head. We've kind of, in a very emergency medicine fashion, veered away and come back, veered away and come back. And I love it, and we encourage that. So, but anything that either one of you want to share.
Just real quick on the language thing, though.
Yeah.
So if you're the provider, like if you're the physician and you do speak their language, like can you speak to them?
It depends on your hospital system.
Yeah.
It depends on your hospital system. Many hospital systems have a certification mechanism. So like I'm certified by the Department of Health Services of Los Angeles to speak Spanish, so I can speak.
Okay.
But so what that's supposed to mean is that I am certified to do my own job in Spanish. I'm
Right.
not supposed to be acting as an interpreter for other people.
Yeah,
right.
But in essence, what it means is that everybody's always like, "Hey, can you just,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
can you just help it or whatever?" But
You can talk to your patient
Yeah.
so
in
Okay.
the
when you
language
get
that you
that
speak,
kind of
but yeah.
certification.
Our medical staff bylaws, we actually have that added in.
Yeah.
Fluency, you can do your own patient interactions.
And that's pretty common in
So
most bylaws that you'll see.
You should figure out that for the hospital that you're in, like what their policy is, because they vary greatly. A lot of them are like a self-assessment using the ILR scale, and so if you read the categories and you say, "Oh, I definitely fit in that category, and I'm willing to testify to that," then you can speak to that.
Was that training that you mentioned, or the certification, did the hospital pay for that for you, or did you have to pay?
Oh no, there's no.
It's like a test.
It's a test.
It's an exam.
So
Yeah.
it's a face-to-face
Yeah.
exam, and then there's so really, if you read like the class standards, it's supposed to be that you both take take the certification, and you have to have a class in interpreter ethics. So I had to sit through a 2-hour class in interpreter ethics that was full of doctor bashing. It was very interesting.
Wow, they're doing some amazing things in Los Angeles. Yeah, it's every hospital is different. Some may, but there's usually some type of exam for certification. But many people, if they're very fluent and familiar, don't necessarily do the certification. And
I can't afford to be certified because, in my experience, you have to take a certain number of credits, not just like your ethics.
Oh yeah.
And you're paid to take the test.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm not going to spend over $1,000 that I don't have to prove that I can speak my language.
Many places.
That's for your own, but usually,
Yeah.
is that for like professional or just your own hospital? Because usually
It's free usually.
Yeah, it's not for my own hospital.
And then you get paid a little more.
Yeah.
Some hospitals with that extra certificate.
Different from being a certified
Right.
international.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you want to go through is the pathway for the certified medical provider. Okay. And then it should be through your hospital. They shouldn't charge you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something. Just to make sure, no, it's okay. Just to make sure there's time for our two members that joined us. I want to make sure you guys have time to share. If anything moves you.
Well, the Spanish-speaking patient population, I see a lot of them, and so I think the biggest thing you mentioned was like accepting that it's going to take a lot longer.
Yeah.
That was so frustrating for me starting, and I would just like already be in a rush, and I could just feel myself like not engaging them as much, and just kind of being like, I'm not going to ask if they have chest pain because they're going to have chest pain, and just things like that. So you know, it really did take a while for me to accept that it was going to take longer and actually make that a positive interaction with the patient. So yeah, that was, I definitely felt for sure.
I like data, so I actually timed myself on like a lot of different encounters where I used an interpreter and where I didn't, and I found that it was not taking, I was definitely not doing my patients who spoke a different language primarily justice, because it was basically taking the same amount of time, and then I had to reflect back, like that's not possible, like how, it should not take the same amount of time. I'm not speaking faster. So it's, yeah.
And like actually like choosing, I guess, yeah, repetition too, just like choosing the correct phrases and words and things that are going to actually translate.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Oh, the other thing too is like as faculty members, just relieving your trainees of the pressure to take your time with that patient that you need the interpreter with, or obviously if they're sicker or it's a very rare language. Many times like the nurse or other members of the team will just say, we have an interpreter, whoever's going to take care of this patient. Everyone will just kind of come together, listen, make sure we all hear the same thing. That saves a lot of time. No presentation needed. Let's just talk about what we're going to do and let's move on. Like that's to me like awesome.
You also made a good point about learning to do it correctly. I had one of my faculty members tell me very early on that the interpreter phone is actually a skill to learn throughout residency, and that made a really big difference for the way I thought about it, because then I was focusing on learning how to use the interpreter phone better to increase my skills rather than be frustrated by using it.
Hey.
Is this any?
Any experience where you felt othered or felt included and noticed other people weren't included, and how that shaped your view of the world?
Well, I feel like, you know what, I think, like we touched on this earlier, but I think it's an important skill to learn and to teach other people to realize that taking someone just on their face value is kind of a ridiculous thing to do. Like, the way I dress now is not necessarily the way I dress outside. I'm certain you get totally different interpretations of me personally. I had a fun, so I'm a co-chair for our diversity and inclusion group. And so when you're getting up an intern orientation, presenting your group, encouraging people, if they want to join, come on in. And one of the interns raised their hand and is like, why are you interested in this? And I was like, because diversity and inclusion is very near and dear to my heart. I think I just went off and and it was so fun. One of my colleagues was in the back and just started was silently laughing. I had to leave the room. She was like, that was awesome. Because she knows like personal history. I'm Chicana, so, and I know like the way I look, and but it was just funny. Like I made it the most ambiguous statement. Like she couldn't tell I could be like just from an LGBT stance. She had no idea by the end of it, and I was just like, that's how you should interpret it. Like that's the point. Like it isn't like I don't have to be motivated, like just because. I mean, I do have to, but you know. But that was kind of a fun that was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And definitely things I enjoy. Like that's my new like just because.
Yeah.
Just
We
messing
should
with
all
people.
care about we should
Yeah.
all care about diversity and inclusion. All of us are different. It doesn't matter. You could still be you could be a white man and be different from the other white man sitting next to you. You have no idea.
We that gets a little bit something we'll talk about it later, but a concept of calling in versus calling out people. So if people make a statement that could be something that's interpreted differently, or feel like, oh well, why would you say that, or I can't believe this person would do this thing that's not, it's not the rules of our diversity. How are you saying that? Instead of calling that person out per se, there's this concept of calling them in and inviting them to like, well, why'd you say that? How can we talk about this? What's the difference here? I was corrected by one of our interns recently. This was when you and Tim and I met at that restaurant many months ago.
At that restaurant.
You got like a vegan. Anyways, long story short, we were talking about some of our diversity curriculum that we're doing at UCSF.
Oh yeah, okay. I remember.
And I was mentioning something about, I think I said like gender reassignment surgery, and he said, well, I understand that you've learned that, but it's now the more accepted term is actually gender confirmation surgery. And I said, oh, okay, thank you for teaching me. But he called me in instead of calling me out and saying like, I can't believe you think you're the diversity guy. You said the wrong thing. He totally just called me. He called me in and included me there, and I thought that was really helpful. So in those moments, if that's possible.
Like engaging versus confronting.
And then Shannon, did you want to? I know you spoke.
Oh. I got you. Thank you.
I wasn't sure if I
I'll play that.
You spoke. I don't know if you want to share a personal story, if you whatever you know.
So I'm a white woman. I pass for a lot of my identities, and so I have a lot of privilege, but like underneath the surface, there are parts of my identity that people don't necessarily see. Although that changed once I went out to the real world. And I say that because I'm Jewish, and I grew up in a very Jewish community where Jews were the majority, and then that was my whole upbringing, and my parents were like warning me of things that were said to them and things that I should be careful of and places to not go, just to keep at the back of my mind, but I never really thought about that much because that wasn't where I grew up. And then I went to a very Jewish school for undergrad. Just by happenstance, there's a large Jewish population, and in my lovely little echo chamber, I didn't have any real experience with anyone who would make any comments. But it was when I was in high school, I did a program, one of those summer programs for students who want to do college-y things. And somehow religion came up. And, I mean, I had just finished my freshman year of high school, and one of the girls made a comment about, like, oh, I never met a Jew before. And I was like, how do I respond to this? And then she just started her list of questions, but they were mostly based in like stereotypes or trying to think of the right word, like really mean assumptions, like questions about horns because Jews have horns, things like that. And so I was just like, wow. And then I remembered, oh, my parents did warn me about this, but I did not think it was real. And so that was just like this one really strange, isolated incident. And then I went back to my little bubble. But now, med school, where I'm interacting with patients, either one, patients correctly assume that I'm Jewish and then choose to make comments about that or refuse care, or chatting with me and sharing their views about what they think of LGBTQ people, or people with mental illness, or people with this or that or the other thing with which I identify, and I'm just sitting there like, what do I do now? The most common issue being patients making remarks on my gender, or specifically male patients thinking that it's perfectly okay to make certain types of comments to me, or like the classic, I need to listen to your heart, and you don't need to take off your shirt, but I do need to touch my stethoscope to your chest, so I'll be navigating around your shirt, and patients just like throwing their shirt off, and I'm like, okay, I'm not comfortable here. And the advice I got from the only female physician that I had encountered in my first year of medical school was, make sure that your tops go up to your neck and your skirts go down to your ankles. So it was just strange encounters with identities that I hold that I just didn't expect to have bias, I guess. Like similarly to many people in the group, like I have a great interest in diversity and inclusion, and like doing whatever I can to be an ally and support voices, not override them. But I'm always thinking of identities that aren't mine. Yeah. And so I just thought those two experiences were just strange other things in which I was othered, but I didn't really think about them until this exercise. Yeah.
I'm happy that that opened up some channels for you. Seriously, thank you for sharing them. We will be touching on different ways to respond to some of those similar situations.
Thank you.
Yeah.